Howdy. I come to you fresh from Cancun, Mexico, where I conducted a wedding for Ellery Hillard, and the oldest daughter of Mitch and Sherry Hillard. And I was in a very, very, very posh resort down there where I conducted it. And some have heard this story, forgive me, but it's not bad. So it's one of those all-inclusive, including all of the alcohol.
Yes.
And there were people who took full advantage of it. And I think it was the rehearsal or something, and I was walking back to my room at a modest Padre hour of about 8:30 or something like that, as sober could be. And I passed this group of very, very drunk people. And I was dressed in all black with my collar on, and they looked at me and it was like, Father, Father, Father. And I'm like, hello. And I'm like, I hope, make it stop. They go, are you here for a wedding?
Yeah.
Now, I grew up on Mad Magazine, snappy answers to stupid questions, And so I said, no, I'm here for a funeral. And put on a nice serious mug. And then as I'm walking away, I said, it's a destination funeral. and they were like, sorry, Father, sorry. So that's where I'm coming from today, making the adjustment. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. I love marrying your children. It is the most fun ever. It's so touching. And got a couple on deck before, and looking forward to it all. So today, thank you for coming. My goodness, I'm touched and moved. I figured after the nuns we would take a big hit. They were pretty something. Any reflections? And I really want you to be responsive tonight. But any reflections on listening to the sisters from the Salesians, particularly around this issue of discerning the call of God? What did you hear and what did you see from them, apart from them being full of passion and joy? Yeah, Alex.
I thought the wonderful thing about them was the mix. We had one person who was, Sister Amy was had it all in the corporate world. We had, what was the last sister's name? Chelsea?
Chelsea, yep.
Chelsea, who had always been looking for something.
Right.
And so coming from an entirely different perspective. And then we had Sister Pamela, who was already, and most people would say, called by God.
Right.
But there still was something still further calling her.
Yeah, that's right.
I love that everybody was so different in where they were before they seemed to answer this call.
What else did you see?
They were genuine. I mean, their love and everything just came right out.
It did, yeah. It's so funny because both my sons were here, if you recall, and they grew up with nuns just like that. And so I was sort of contrasting the experience of them, but they grew up at Camp Auxilium and then went to St. Joseph's, and all the nuns they've ever really known have been young and full of joy, and like they're like, what are you talking about? That's what a nun is. I'm like, oh boy, no. But there were a couple of characteristics that I noticed, and we're going to talk about it a little bit tonight. I'm going to share some very personal stuff with you. But there was a sense of an ecstatic encounter that they seemed to all have. Yeah, giddy, but it was almost like a before and after. Like I was here, and then I met Jesus. In a kind of like an epiphany, miraculous. Sister Amy was the first one, and it was at the Assumption Chapel. I felt this pull, this lead, the voice of God saying to me, go into this chapel. I went in there and I found Jesus. Very Baptist sounding, right? The kind of stuff I grew up with, right? Agnes was saved. You know, she's like, you got that right. Yeah, you know that, right? You know, they did not sound like Episcopalians. Good, you got my joke. Yeah. You know, Episcopalians typically don't sit around and talk about an ecstatic encounter with Jesus. Although it happens, but they're embarrassed by it and would never mention it to anybody. You know, right? It shall never be spoken of. But and so there would, and it was deeply personal, right? And they really, and again, this might sound judgmental, and forgive me, I'm just a dude trying to figure out how God works, okay? And I'm sure that the way that other people put this together is probably more accurate than me. So let me just start with a word of humility, because you know, it's to kind of figure out what you believe around such things as listening to God's voice. Some of it's done by ruling out, you know, by encountering other people's approach and go, well, that sounds good, but that doesn't really speak to me. And that doesn't mean they're wrong. I'm probably more wrong than anybody. So, but I've thought a lot about this and come to some conclusions that would be different, hopefully, than yours. And so we'll parse that out. So, okay, so it's this encounter, so they had this sort of transcendent engagement with Jesus Christ, and again, this might be a judgment, but the only thing they could figure out what to do with that was to be a nun. You know, and you know the therefore none. And I also served for many years on the Commission on Ministry in a diocese, and that is the commission in the Episcopal Church that does discernment with folks around the issue, or are you called to the priesthood or not? Okay, so you know we spend a lot of time talking, praying, discerning with people around these issues, and so there's kind of a sense, I think, in a way, that we have dumbed down being a non-ordained person so much, so that when a non-ordained, better said, the baptized believers have this kind of engagement or have a profound spiritual experience, maybe the only thing therefore I must be a priest, you know, and I think that's not a necessary move, to put it mildly. And in fact, maybe some kind of core engagement with God is the normative Christian experience, or could be. So that's kind of what I'm toying around with. Any other thoughts or reflections? Okay, well, the second part to it, and we'll get to this, but that the personal transcendent experience in a chapel was not nearly enough, right? You know, this had to be presented to a body to be affirmed, right? You know, so just kind of having overflowing feelings is not sufficient within that particular system. For, you know, so you really want to do this? Well, then fine. You know, that's not the way it works, right? You know, it took years of further discernment with other people, you know, not a private in your closet kind of practice. So, all right. So in 2008, who was here in 2008 in the church? Very good. This church. Yeah. And in 2008, I had lost all my options except to get into some tacky pickup truck driven by Nick Packnos, who took me to a place called Warnersville, Pennsylvania. And you know that your life is over if you're going to Warnersville. Warnersville, Pennsylvania is where the Karen Foundation is. and they specialize in the treatment of addiction. So it was certainly one of the lowest points of my entire life. I was drinking just notoriously for a while before that. And I'm brought out there, and I said to Nick, can you tell the people on Sunday that I'm away for my exhaustion? Like the celebrities. Have you noticed that Father's been extra special tired lately? So I need treatment for my exhaustion. And Nick didn't really like that idea too much. He said, no, we're going to stand up, me and the wardens, and we're going to say Robert's getting treatment for his alcoholism. Can you imagine telling the truth to a church? It's like a horrible idea, right? So, it struck me as a really, really horrible idea. And my assumption was, my gut told me, and we'll talk about that, listening to your gut. Somebody told me yesterday that they always listen to their gut. My gut told me that if you knew the truth about me, you would hate me.
Me too.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And that you would leave me, and that it would destroy the church. That's what I believed in the core of me. If you knew the truth, then it's done. And Nick is stubbornly insisting on telling everybody the truth, which I was trying to talk him out of, but I was unsuccessful, apparently. So about 3 weeks into my stay there, one of the key figures in that place is a guy, he's gone on to the great AA meeting in the sky, but his name is Father Bill. He's a Roman Catholic priest in recovery himself. He had 30 years sober or something like that at the time. And he could see that I was one whoop dude. And he comes up to me in the dining hall. Yeah, by the way, thank you for sending me to a very posh place. The food was incredible there. But he comes up and he puts his arm around me, and he knew I was a priest, and he said, if you keep doing this, meaning recovery, he goes, you are going to be an extraordinary asset to other people. And I didn't see how that was possible. All I could see was the deficit and the shame, the embarrassment of what I was going through. But he promised that would be true. So about 3 months after I came back to you and was met with nothing but grace, it was an extraordinary experience, of coming back. And you weren't mad at me. You loved on me. Thank you for that. And it was breathtaking. It was odd. It startled me how kind you were to me. And I didn't, I still don't think I deserved it, but you did it anyway. Isn't that the way it works, right? The prayer book definition of grace: God's unmerited favor, neither earned nor deserved. And that's what you were. So about 3 months into this recovery gig, and I still was so fragile. I can remember Keith coming up to me right over here. And I don't know, I was back about 2 months maybe. And he said, Robert, I need to speak to you. And I'm like, oh boy, what is this? The nerve of this guy. I think he was warden or something. But what does he want? What did I do? And my mind is just going everywhere. God. Well, can we talk now? Because I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight, over, I need to speak to you. So he goes, okay. I said, let's go to my office. We go to my office, and he goes, I just wanted to tell you my dad died, and and it just shows you what my head was like, you know, and I'm in this incredibly fragile state. So about a month later, I get this invitation to speak at a AA meeting for the first time, and you know, to stand up and share my story. And it was at this place I'd never heard of called Alina Lodge in Blairstown. So where, well, we'll get into that a little bit more. So I go there and I'm thinking, all right, this is like, you know, when you look at the Old Testament, see how it predicts Jesus, you know, it's the prophecy and the fulfillment. And I go, here it is. This is what Father Bill promised. You know, he said you would be useful to other people. And I went there with this woman who had like 25 years. And she goes, why don't you go first? And I said, okay. And I got up, and it was absolutely the worst public speaking job I've ever done in my entire life. I mean, it just was like the Hindenburg crashing. You know, it's a tough crowd, but I didn't know the crowd, and I did not. And it just leveled me, you know. And I remember going home, and Erica was like, so how'd it go? And I was like, it was awful. It was awful. I'm not going to be doing anything like this at all. You know, that this is just pain, like unredeemed, you know, of no value. It's just, I sucked, you know. And then this woman gets up. She was like, you know, this big gray hair, and just had them eating out of her hand. She was hilarious, you know. She was hilarious. She had spoken, I don't know, like 720 times or something like that. You know? I mean, she was polished, working class, no flash, but just brilliant. And it was something else, but didn't help me. So then like 3 years after that, I get another invitation to go back there. And I'm like, oh boy. I was trained, never say, if you can say yes, never say no to AA. And I'm like, okay, I'll go back. And by then I had spoken quite a bit and had a different result. And it was like a couple years later that the director of the whole institution, Michael Hornstein, called me, and he said, we're looking for somebody to come in and lecture on the spirituality of recovery. And I started that in 2015 for an hour twice a month. And then it started clicking and started working. And people were responding to what I was offering. And then they wanted me to do more stuff. And they wanted me to sit in on the treatment planning sessions with a psychiatrist, with a bunch of social workers, with addiction specialists, the medical doc, the nurses, and it's a big, big program. They have 82 employees, and they wanted me to offer the sort of spirituality take on the patients that we treat. And I'm sitting in that room with all those people. And I don't know how many of you know that the job that I had right before coming here, I was a priest in 3 different churches before, but right before coming here, I was the director of a psychiatric service agency in Jersey City. And I'm sitting down, I know all the psych meds, I know all the language that they're using. And I'm having this almost like out of the body experience of like my entire life is kind of pointing towards this moment, you know, where my past, the sort of the psychiatric dimension of, you know, being the director of a psychiatric service agency, you know, my whole recovery story, and the fact that I'm a priest, you know, it's all sort of coalescing in this place. And I'm like, well, shut my mouth, as my grandmother would say. You know, this is something. And you know, and I'm using clinical terms, and they're like, well, you know. And so that's when the possibility of, the next phase of my life began to present itself. And they kept asking for more, and, here we are. June 5th is coming. So, so I'm sort of throwing that out there for a bunch of different elements in terms of discernment, of discerning one's place in the world, one's call by God. And there are a number of different elements that are present in that one particular story. I could talk about my, call to the priesthood or whatever mess that was, but that's a little different than this one. What did you hear in that? In my story of like discernment in this case? What elements were present?
That there's no mistakes.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, I've had a similar experience where I've had kind of what they call a patchwork career, but none of it's wasted. It just seems, if you hang with it, it seems to come together.
Okay, so there's a sort of a utility, whatever, you get the idea, of the past, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that some of your life experience is kind of pointing. There's almost a trajectory too. What else?
Listening to what other people say.
Yeah, big time.
Without you.
Big time. Other people, and the big figure in all this is Father Bill, because that wouldn't have necessarily occurred to me, and then the other factor that you might not immediately identify is that there's a component of mess to this and of weakness, right?
Yep.
And redemption. So,
and also the grace of the redemption, because it happens whether you planned it or not.
yeah. So I mean, big time, like grace. So it's and this is not always logical, and it's not the way that you'd plan it.
Right.
There's a kind of a very, I'd like to call it sort of natural theology, but there's a very appealing kind of way to do life discernment that starts with your talents, and people in Bible study know this well, because, I've called it seriously into question. And part of it has to do with the kind of era which I grew up, where we were encouraged not to talk about our gifts, that it sounded boastful or haughty, right? Some people were brought up properly in that way. But around the church nowadays, it's very, very, very popular. And so the first convention that Carly had, she had made up these giant badges that said, "Ask me about my gifts." So I couldn't wait to get a whole bunch of them and bring them back to the Bible study and say, "Oh, we have to all put these on now." And again, now I'm sounding very judgmental. Maybe that is the best way to do this, okay? There is a problem when people don't fully affirm their giftedness. That's a problem that Carly was seeking to address. But Alina didn't want me because of my gifts, I don't think. It was something about this grace encounter around redeemed mess, one time I stood here and said to you, and I was really hurt when you agreed with me. It was really devastating to my very fragile ego. I said, "I think God has done more with my mess in this church than he has with my talent." And you're all like going, "Uh-huh." I'm like, a little pushback, please. I mean, something.
Just wanted to agree.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, but you're so talented, So I mean, to use the old language, I grew up Southern Baptist, it's conservative evangelical. There's something kind of worldly about sort of boiling it all down to talent, I'm more interested in dying and rising, Yeah.
until they've been through a big mess.
Yeah, I'll give you that, you know, and so I think absolutely, but you know, in terms of the story that we're committed to as Christians, I like this one. I like the one where it's not occurring to you naturally, but it's a suspension of the rational kind of, you know, cognitive approach to moving oneself forward. So I think there's great appeal in this. Also, I think it's very biblical. What's the other one too? I mean, you hear nowadays, do what you love and you never work a day in your life. Kathy, you're shaking her head. That's like, that shit don't work.
I do what I love, but it doesn't work.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. No, I know what you're talking about. You know, and you know, and I was in preparation for this, I was reading Jeremiah, who was one of my favorites. I mean, he's just hilarious because you know, he's called the reluctant prophet. You know, God speaks to him directly. That's the other component about the nuns, is that they had a direct revelation to God. You shall be a nun. You know, which is an interesting take. It'll be fun to see what Novella George does with this topic. She's coming in 2 weeks. And I know that the tradition she comes from, the African-American semi-Pentecostal tradition, believes that to the core, that you can receive direct messages from God to you that are crystal clear. People like Jeremiah make me wonder sometimes about that. And we'll look at this. Well, so his call, again, by the point of contrast, was not about his talents. So here's how it went down. Just as blunt as could be. I don't know if this is auditory hallucination or what. I mean, or, you know. Now the word of the Lord came to me. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations. And then I said, great, Lord. I can't wait. No, that's not what he says at all. He says, Lord God, truly, I do not know how to speak, for I am only a boy. Like, I'm way too young. I am unfit for this duty, you know? And some of you on vestry know that we always do way, way, way more better with the vestry members who don't want to be on the vestry. The ones who are very eager to be on the vestry don't work out so well. So he's like, no. We're not doing this. The Lord said to me, do not say I'm only a boy. For you shall go to all to whom I send you, and you shall speak whatever I command you. And do not be afraid of them, for I am with you to deliver you. You know, it's not about you, it's about me. Now shut up and go, you know, is the response. Very different than the, you know, the kind of strong interest inventory was one of the things I took in college, you know, to find out. I think I was supposed to be a dancer or something, you know, he took that. And, you know, so he goes, and the other discernment that's very key, as you all know, that if you are doing and following what the Lord has for you to do, then you're going to be happy, right? You know, this is common. What's that? Maybe, right. But this is sort of common, we might say, worldly wisdom, right? You know, that you'll know that it's right because it just feels so damn good. You know, right? And that was not Jeremiah's experience, to put it mildly. Here's here's what he says about trusting your own gut. He writes, first he writes, blessed are those who trust in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord. We just had this 2 weeks ago, right? Who read it? Anybody here? No. Whoever did it nailed it. It was great. And then he says this: the heart is devious above all else. It is perverse. Who can understand it? The gut, is really what he's talking about. Is takes you easily off course. I met yesterday with one of the patients at Alina, and she was a hot mess. And she said, well, the one thing that I've learned in all of this recovery business is that I just need to trust my heart and listen to my gut. And I said, well, don't do that. The Bible study people know this story too well, but it was the best. It was back in the Dan and Nancy Richter days. It was so wonderful. And we had this sort of new agey group of Lisa Flaherty and that were coming to the Bible study. And they were very sort of California in their the kind of phrases that they used, and they were lovely and wonderful. And so and Dan and Nancy Richter, super rigid, super old school Anglican, didn't like anything that departed even an iota from the true faith. They were just squirming whenever any of these wonderful ladies would share. And so one of the ladies said, I don't know, we just need to listen to our hearts. And Scott Witt was there. Does anyone remember Scott Witt? He was a young man, wonderful, two great kids. He was the groundskeeper up at the high school. And we were sitting right over there. And he looks at me, his dad was a priest. And he goes, not my heart. I said, there's an unreliable guy. He was speaking from personal experience. My heart gets me in trouble. And again, this is Jeremiah's experience. The heart is devious above all else. It is perverse. Who can understand it? And then finally, this was what we built, I built the Lenten series 2 years ago on this wonderful, wonderful bit of Jeremiah, where this is not a pleasant experience at all. And the Hebrew, some of you know this, wimps out on the Hebrew doesn't, the translations do, every one of them. Because the language here is of sexual overpowering. There's another word for that. It's non-consensual. Sexual overpowering is what's behind it. And I'm aware of no translator who has the guts to say this the right way. So listen to Jeremiah's experience of his call. Lord, you have enticed me, and I was enticed. Lord, you have overpowered me, and you have prevailed against my will. I've become a laughingstock all day long. Everyone mocks me. Whenever I speak, I must cry out. I must shout violence and destruction. But if I say, I will not mention him, he's fed up with God. I will not mention him or speak anymore in his name, then within me there is something like a burning fire shut up in my bones, and I am weary with holding it in, and I cannot. And so you can see the kind of contrast there with his experience of call, a very, very, very core experience, but it is agony for him, And God finally says to him, oh, come on, just knock it off. You're taking this all too seriously. He goes, would you stop talking trash and just do the job I got for you? It's really quite funny. So there's something I like about that. It's perhaps the voice of God, the call of God is almost despite ourselves. There's a kind of an oddness to it. that might qualify as a different kind of ingredient, a gospel ingredient, not one that that your therapist might recommend. A little different take on it. Any questions or comments before we really get going here? Yes.
The phrase that came to me was fullness of time.
Yes.
Like 5 years ago, you weren't ready for it. Now
Yeah.
you are.
That's right. So that's a good discernment thing, right? You know, and 2 months sober, I completely bombed. 4 years later or whatever, it worked. Yeah. So there's a timing thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It's do you know how did you come up with that phrase?
I just love that phrase. And
Do you-
I don't,
Do you know where it comes from, or?
I think it's biblical.
It is, yeah. And it's also in the Mass here.
Okay, yeah.
I think it's in Eucharistic Prayer B that we're not using now, but we
The
did.
arrival of Jesus.
Yeah, in the fullness of time, and it's intended to contrast chronos from kairos. Chronos,
Does
what?
it show up in Isaiah too?
Could be.
One of the, we're not here yet, but in the fullness of time we'll be there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very biblical concept through, but I think, Melissa, do you know where it is? She's one of my good fundamentalists here. You always need to have a fundamentalist close at hand. But she failed me tonight, so. Yeah, so the whole idea is that in Greek, there are two words for time. One is chronological time, which is just, one moment after another strung together, very incrementally. And then kairos is this ripeness of time, where time can get suspended, or where God interrupts, that God interjects himself into the whole scheme, and time gets warped. Do you want to say something?
I did want to say something. It's more directed towards you. Like, if we look at Jesus, I don't know if everyone feels this way, that you're God, so you could take on the cross. We as mortals couldn't, right?
Right.
So I don't know if everybody feels that way, but he could take the 40 whippings that he got, but maybe a mortal man could have only taken like 20, whatever it was taken.
Right.
So there's like a disconnect between the two, right? There's a good disconnect between Jesus and mankind because, well, we're not like you.
Right.
But him giving you the opportunity to have that alcoholism, right?
Right.
You're able to relate to people that have it,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So I think all these things come from him. Not that he's making you an alcoholic.
No, that's a perfectly fine thing. I mean, that's, some see it that way. That's not the way I put it together,
No, I understand.
but it's a perfectly fine way to look at it.
So other people in the community could be like, well, he suffered with it and he was able to overcome it and still be a leader. Maybe I could do something in, my own community.
I am sure that my scary talent, which is just so abundantly clear to all of you, is insufficient to speak to the residents of Alina Lodge. That it's only the brokenness underneath it that makes it convincing. So I think that you're right. Yeah, and it's a big question and it's a great question, but let's get back to that in a second. But thank you for no. That was very helpful, Maureen.
This is my experience that being in therapy forever and being in Christ Church for half the time I'm in therapy, I find that you come to the conclusion about yourself a little bit quicker when you're in church.
It's cheaper too.
So, of course, in therapy, when something's wrong, you go to your mother, and then you go blah, 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 blah. But I really, you spoke to me when you said in the beginning that you felt rotten to the core. And I think you're not alone in that, and I feel that I'm a rotten apple to the core, but God's gonna work with me.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people are walking around with that same feeling of feeling like they're not worth much. And what's the answer? Well, I can only speak for myself, but having a relationship with God, higher calling. And this Lent, I'm saying, what does Jesus Christ mean for me? I haven't come to any conclusion, but I'm working on it.
I can't wait to hear what you conclude. And thank you for that. You know that the 2 Corinthians verse that means so much to me is God's power is made perfect in weakness. Because if it's all based on some innate gifts, then it's explainable. But if it sort of breaks out of that prison of explanation, I think the early church, at least the way the story's put together, left everybody head scratching. It was like, aren't these just fishermen? I mean, what? But they have words of power. So it's got to be coming from somebody else besides their own innate gifts, So it's a lovely thing. So, so God specializes in messes. Lisa.
I think the fullness of time comes from the phrase having to do with Mary's pregnancy. And
It does. It does. And that's in the Mass, right? Exactly. Yeah. But we'll look it up and give a full report later. But any other comments or, yeah.
This has been kind of working on me. There's this element of trust there. Like when you were talking before about, you suspend some rational thinking about, just like turn your attention and drill down on every fact about yourself or your circumstances. That I feel like in the beginning, there was a little bit of trust there that you had no idea what was going to happen, but you kind of put yourself in God's hands.
Right.
And it grew and it grew and grew over the years to bring you to where you are, or to when you made that decision, or heard that call, or answered that call, however you put it.
Right.
That element of trust is very powerful to me listening to this story. Small and then bigger, but always constant.
Oh, right. And that's a big part of all this because the, recovering is very difficult. And you kind of had to say, all right, well, I see all these other people and they pulled it off. So I'll just do what they do. And I don't like most of them, but I'm going to do it anyway, and I've got, you can imagine how this was received. I came into AA with a million suggestions on how they could improve their spirituality. And my sponsor had at the time like 35 years, and he was an iron worker. And he goes, yeah, you might want to think about just listening for a while. And that was very good wisdom on his part. Yeah. So the takeaway here is, it's not always about like what you feel drawn towards, because the heart is deceitful. And the Hebrew sort of says this translation has perverse, but it's that it's sick. It's got an illness. Our discernment thing's got an illness. And so we need other people to kind of flesh this out. Like, what do you think about it? It's so bizarre. I mean, I've been a priest for 36 years, and I consult more in my 36 years than I ever have in my entire priesthood. I don't know what to do about this. I don't know what to do. Like, talk to other people about it. What do you think? It's, you figure I would know, but what I know is what I don't know. So it's a sort of a we process because, I'm aware of how easy it is to deceive oneself, right? Mark.
I don't know if you can do this or not, but I'd be curious to know what you see different in your discernment process now and the discernment process for the priesthood.
Oh boy, yeah, that's super complicated. I mean, my psychological motivations for becoming a priest seem so apparent to me now, looking back on it. Let me just kick off a whole new thing here and like kick over some sandcastles and kind of get at this. I was never convinced that God called me to the priesthood because I'm not sure that it works that way. I didn't have a strong interior pull or a kind of a auditory hallucination. It was a sort of a concept. I grew up Southern Baptist, and I felt this pull from God, but I didn't know what to do with it. And so when I won the scholarship to go to Oxford, and people asked me what I wanted to do, what do you want to do? I said, I want to be a pastoral counselor. I wanted to be like a spiritual therapist, because the model for ministry, that the only one I knew, I was like, I can't do that. I can't do that Baptist minister role. And one of the reasons is that, well, I'm trying to figure out a positive way to say this. I came from a really messed up house, and we couldn't talk about that in church. There was some pressure to kind of say, all right, well, because we believe in Jesus, then we're happy and everything's fine. Because we were like marketing. And so when I got to England and saw what priests did, and I said, I could do that. Plus, the great irony is, I can do that and drink. What could go wrong? It's perfect. It's a drinking, like Jesus tradition. This is, yeah, that's right. Exactly. No, this was music to my formerly Southern Baptist years, and they didn't get freaked out about all that. I thought, well, this is for me. And you could doubt, and you could, raise questions without getting into trouble. And I like that too. Yeah. So, to me, what is God's will? What is God's plan? That's kind of what we're bumping up against, right? And the way that I have put this together, and I'm not in any way offering this as the only legitimate one, but that it's general rather than specific. That we have general instructions like, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. That's God's plan for your life, period. And it again, from my own interpretation, how I made it through the process, I have no idea. But so it wasn't like, therefore I have to be a priest. No, anybody can do that. And I think it's insulting to you as non-priests to say, if you really take that seriously, we only have one response to ordain you. It dumbs down what is expected or not expected, what's possible for anybody. Like every single person that's ever come to me and said, I really am starting, I need to tell you that I feel like I'm being called to the priesthood. And I go, oh, I cannot tell you how disappointed I am. Because what that means is that you have lost your imagination as to how to do this Jesus thing without a collar, and that's sad. It's sad that that's all we know how to do with it. That if you're passionately into God, that there's only one, and that's kind of what I was saying about the nuns, that there's a kind of an ill-equipped approach that,
That can be the only way for some people. For those 3 women who were here last week, there's no question about that. Now, maybe 10 years down the road, they may take a different turn or something.
Right.
But it seems very unlikely.
You never know. I mean, I've seen nuns, but yes, right, exactly, and that's fine.
And that's why such things exist. That is a path.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, right. So probably the reason that I am a priest is that I have a very limited imagination. The only way I could figure out how to serve Jesus, like you seem to be able to have done without doing this, but I was stupider than you. Like, I needed more specific instructions, and I love the dress up. Yes, Tim. Yeah.
But there is something that I can't very easily reconcile. At the end of Matthew's Gospel, Jesus says, "All power is given to me in heaven and earth and upon earth. Go therefore into all nations, go forth and baptize, and ensure that everybody keeps my commandments. Go into all nations." But earlier on, somewhere in the Gospel, he says, "I am not sent, but the lost sheep of the house of Israel."
Right.
And that's very, very restrictive indeed.
It is, yeah.
And so it seems to me that there's something that's inherently contradictory in the message that we get from certain parts of the Bible.
Yeah, well, it could be a kairos issue, that you were talking about. Yeah.
Can I address
Yes.
him?
Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry. So when Jesus was talking and making that parable, he was talking to a woman who he needed that woman
Yes,
with her
exactly.
Yeah.
to confirm her faith.
Yeah.
But he wants everyone to be reached,
Right.
right? So
Yeah, and a good point, that's a Syrophoenician woman, and she wins him over and ends up
she
getting,
needed it too. Like she didn't know.
Yeah,
that
that's
she was
right.
gonna be able
So
to-
Yeah.
wasn't he actually testing?
Testing.
yeah, that's right, exactly, yeah. No, yeah, well played, Carol, thank you. Yeah, so if, so it's, in my, I'm just throwing this out as one possibility. The call is to love God with all of yourself and love your neighbor as yourself. And then what how does that work? What's the specific sort of arrangements for such a thing? That's when talking to other people. That's when, prayer is huge in this, but with some degree, speaking for myself, of suspicion about what I'm concluding in prayer alone. I don't take that as authoritative. I'm envious of people that do. Joel Osteen is always so enigmatic and winning for me. He talks about hearing these direct things from God, and then blasting through all the opposition in his congregation and winning. It all works out, in his story. And I'm personally more aware of my deceitful heart and going down the wrong road. But anyway, that's and so, not to be pedantic, but what is God's plan for your life? What is God's will for your life? Will you persevere in resisting evil, and whenever you fall into sin, repent and return to the Lord? I will, we say. Will you proclaim by word and example the good news of God in Christ? Will you seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving your neighbor as yourself? Will you strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being? And we say, I will. Now, how does that work? Can you do that anywhere? I think so. You can do it in prison. You could do it as CEO. Does anybody here, now we got 5 more minutes, okay? Does anybody here, did they have a sense of being called to whatever your work was or is? Alex is going to talk on the last session, but yeah, go ahead.
Oh. I just always felt like I was given the gift of touch.
Right.
Didn't ignore it, but knew it was there, but didn't follow it until 18 years ago. But I definitely felt it was called, and that I was called to do it, and that and it was totally didn't make sense at the time, but I always say God gave me this.
Right.
It's just I don't know how else to explain it.
Yeah, that's right. It's lacking in earthly explanation.
Right.
And it doesn't logically flow. Although it's ancient or old, within you, is what you're suggesting, right?
Yeah, since the time I was a child.
Yeah, right. And did you have a moment where it was sort of confirmed in your spirit, if you will? Where you go, yes, this is right.
You mean making the choice to do it?
At any point in any of this.
Well, when you say talk to other people, like, I don't know, I always go back to saying, like, my father always said to me on the farm, Kathy, this animal is agitated, you touch it.
That's right, exactly.
Like,
So
he knew that I could calm down any of the animals.
you had the shining, as Scatman Crothers call it.
That's the only, when you ask that confirmation, like, that's.
Yeah, well, that's huge. Yeah, Mark.
Speaking exactly to that, when she started massage school, she was going through a bit of an illness at the same time and a bad job situation.
Mhm.
And I would talk to her during the day, and it was like I was talking to do.
Right.
She would call me at the break in massage school, and it was a different human being.
Yeah.
There was joy.
I remember those two Kathys as well. I was around for that. Yeah. You were so unhappy. Yeah. And that's good. Yeah, Carol.
I'm gonna try to keep it short.
Yeah.
But sorry. So when the nuns came in last week, because I'm narcissistic, I apologize. I felt really jealous of them.
Yeah.
Why did God call them and we didn't get a calling?
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know. I just did. And
Yep.
and then I talked to God and he's like, well, everybody has a different calling, right?
Right.
Because he told people to go out and reproduce. Right?
Yeah, that's right. I'm good at breeding.
Well, I'm not gonna have children, and the world will just end at that.
Yeah.
But there's also gay people but there's just so many different varieties out there that make up what we are in the world, right?
Right.
We need them. People don't like them, but we need them. Like,
Yeah, no,
they
absolutely.
bring a certain thing to the table that, somebody else wouldn't, because they see a different perspective from being that way. Like if someone, and I'm not trying to get political, but if someone told me I gotta start loving women tomorrow, I couldn't do it.
Right.
So how can I judge somebody that loves a man?
Right.
To be like, what? I'm not getting political.
No, that's all right. That's all right.
You know
We can
what I
handle it.
I know that the Bible doesn't allow it, but I'm just saying they all bring something different. And
Yeah.
They're trying to tell me that, this is the nuns, these are the priests, and they make up your community of, what's going on. And like any woman here, I'm sure, like if you chose one of us to be married, wouldn't the rest of us be like, well, why did she get to be married?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, and that's it. And that's kind of the church call it our sinful nature sort of twisting and prioritizing. And the gospel that we read in the church for the Mass was, make me great when you come into your kingdom. And actually, it was the mommy. Make my sons sit at your left hand and your right when you come into your glory. So, it's not enough to be surrounding Jesus Christ in his ministry. We want to do it and be the number one person surrounding Jesus, and we twist it around and then we set up hierarchies and it's sad because, I addressed it in the beginning, but to me, there's a profound sadness to lessen the value of what everybody's doing because priests are special. I have a special calling.
Yeah, but you also have these limitations, right? That we
Yeah.
don't have.
Well, yeah, right. But exactly. Well, so everybody's got a function within the body is what Paul would say, And I can remember getting in this argument and I won, but with this one, I was down in Costa Rica. This is Rosa, Rosa. And I said, I was being playful and not really trying to, bust her, but her answers were inadequate. And I said, why do you want to be a priest? And she goes, oh, I want to consecrate my life to Jesus. And I go, well, everybody's supposed to do that. You know what I mean? Like, why you make it special? She goes, oh, but I want to do it all day long. Well, everybody can do it all. You know what I mean? And she's a great priest now, so it worked out. But, this whole sort of idea that there's superior and lesser doesn't seem right at all.
Another conflict is that some parents want their boy to be a priest.
Yes.
And he has said, well, I have the duty to honor my parents and I will try it and see how it goes or whatever. But very often they're unhappy in the sense of performance of priestly duties.
Right.
But on the other hand, it sort of grows upon them and they find that is the right thing. They discover some moments of apparent success one way or another and they say, well, that's
you've just told my entire story, so thank you for that. Yeah. I was talking about the sense of being an imposter, which I think, to some extent or another, all of us have. With my therapist, he said, Robert, you're a kangaroo in a kangaroo suit. So I'm masquerading as a priest. But yeah, so the mask, it's like Max Birnbaum's Happy Hypocrite. If you wear the mask long enough and you take it off, it forms the face underneath, and so.
Somebody wrote about that. You wear the mask for long enough and you actually become what the mask.
That's Max Birnbaum's The Happy Hypocrite. Yeah, it's a great fable, a wonderful fable. Anyway, well, I promised that 5 after we'd be done. And thank you for being so responsive. My gosh, what a great crowd. And it'll be fun to see how this whole thing develops, what the will of God is for our group here. And next week we have Carrie Cavish, who's just been ordained about 6 months, I think. But she came through the standing committee where we have to authorize her, in the whole ordination process. She's the curate of Calvary Church in Summit. And again, she's on the younger side and the smarter side and the more appealing side. So it's another gift, parting gift to the assembled, to give you hope in the church. I just sent Nick a photo of a bunch of bishops without their collars on, and I said, "Look at this. This is what we've become, Nick." And it's the other point of view. But Carrie will be great for you. She's really eloquent about all this.
Dan and Nancy Richter when we need them.
I know, exactly. Yes, right. Well, their spirit is with us. So go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.